Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Tiger Club Zoom call for Tuesday, February 2nd. Today we have our annual visit with the father-son duo of Pat Forde of Sports Illustrated, Mitchell Forde of PowerMizzou, both graduates of the Mizzou School of Journalism. As always, check us out on our website at kctigerclub.com for updated information on news and events and to support our sponsors. If you're not a member, please consider joining. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the like button. Thanks to Darren Wydick for engineering our weekly calls and for today getting me a fancy new microphone so I don't have the problems I had last week. He does an excellent job, and as always, special kudos for our team of Paul Blackman, Barry Cantor, and Dave Tyson for lining up our guests. Again, I ask you to like us on YouTube, and if you didn't see last week's interview with Kathy Nelson and Dave Borchert of the Kansas City Sports Commission, there was just a plethora of information about what's going on in Kansas City sports, and I really recommend it. Our guests today, once again, Pat Forde and Mitchell Forde. Pat is a 1987 Mizzou grad. He's written for the Louisville Courier-Journal, ESPN, and Yahoo Sports before joining Sports Illustrated in 2019. Mitchell, former Mizzou letterman in swimming, has been a longtime contributor to PowerMizzou site with excellent analysis on football and basketball. Guys, I looked back at our call last week when you joined us, and it was 2 days after the Chiefs lost the Super Bowl. Today, it's 2 days after they lost the AFC Championship. I know you're both Broncos fans. You're putting the hex on us. We're going to have to get you scheduled in like September or late March next time.
Sorry about that for the timing there, but I at the risk of inflaming the audience, any season that ends with the Chiefs still having fewer Super Bowl victories than the Broncos is an okay season.
All right. I have from relatives that are rabid Bronco fans. We go through this same discussion. Hey, I want to say one thing before we start. Since we talked to you last year, a member of your family won an Olympic medal, silver medal for your daughter sister Brooke. That's pretty cool.
It was extremely cool. It was, one of those once in a lifetime things, and we had a swimming family, Mitchell and his brother Clayton, and obviously Brooke swimming through college. And it was I guess, kind of a culmination of our family passion to a degree. And I was very lucky to be there and see it. And 2021 will always be remembered fondly for that and for Mitchell getting engaged.
All right. Congratulations on both counts. Pat, I want to start with you. Excuse me. We had breaking news in the last hour. Caleb Williams finally made a decision on where he's going, and I guess it really wasn't a surprise.
No, it wasn't a surprise. Just took a long time to happen. So he's going to USC following Lincoln Riley from Oklahoma there. And this is a guy a lot of people think could end up being a number one NFL draft pick 2 years from now in 2024. Because he's only completed one season of college football, so he's got 2 seasons left before he would enter the draft. Big time talent, and they have amassed a really good offensive nucleus in a hurry at USC, and I expect them to jump back into national prominence quickly. They still have a lot of work to do defensively in the overall roster. I was in Los Angeles last week and talked to Lincoln, and he said they have basically 35 roster openings when he came in, which is a huge amount for a single year. So we'll see what they continue to do with that, but they're off to a very nice start rebuilding USC.
Mitchell, we're on the eve of the old-fashioned signing date, first Wednesday in February. Tigers picked up a commitment from a linebacker, Carmichael out of Louisiana. Do you expect them to sign anybody else tomorrow?
I think there's a chance that they sign one other high school prospect. Glass was one of 3 visitors this past weekend, and there was a guy who was an offensive lineman, Curtis Piegler, who, similar to Glass, didn't have any other no other Power 5 interest or offers. Unheralded guy out of Alabama, but he's got the size. He's 6'5", 340. So I don't know for sure if he'll jump on with Mizzou tomorrow, but if Mizzou wants him, I'm confident he would sign. So we will get our answer tomorrow.
And anything else pending in the transfer portal?
There's always stuff pending in the transfer portal. It's been insane. As you all know, the regular signing day this year, it's not so much of a big deal for Mizzou because they kind of stopped recruiting high school kids after December. It's just been transfers. I think they've now gotten 10 either commitments or enrollees from signature or from transfers. There's still Marquise Robinson, a defensive tackle from Auburn, is a guy to continue to watch. He was on campus this past weekend and then went to Tennessee. I think he finished up his visit there yesterday. But transfers don't necessarily have to decide before tomorrow. So I'm not sure when we'll get a decision on him. He's one to watch. And then I still think after spring football, there's going to be a whole nother wave of transfers. You'll have several guys transfer out of Missouri, but I think there's a chance they might add one or two more then as well.
Who do you see possibly leaving from the current team?
Oh, I feel bad speculating about individuals. But I mean, there's going to have to be some departures because they are over the 85 scholarship limit right now, and they have to get back there by start of fall camp.
Pat, I started listening to your podcast recently with Dan Wetzel, College Football Inquirer, and I want to say it is highly entertaining. I recommend anybody subscribing to it. But you were talking in yesterday's episode about the transfer portal. We have transfer portal ratings now. That's something new.
Yeah, the world of college sports continues to change pretty radically these days. And yeah, I think it's 24/7 Sports now is ranking who's winning the portal, which I guess is kind of inevitable because it's the next stage of recruiting now with somewhat more known quantities because you've got players who have actually developed some body of college football work. But I've been on both sides of the thought, I guess, of whether or not immediate eligibility is good. I decided a year or two ago that I think it is a good thing, that players should have that freedom to be able to move the way a coach could and the way a regular student could, where if you are, if you're at Missouri one year and you want to go to Illinois the next year, you don't have to sit out from whatever you're doing. You can do that. And frankly, in other sports, that's the way it is. In swimming, if you can go from semester to semester. You could be swimming for Missouri one semester and swimming for Kansas the next. Not that anybody would do that, of course, but so I think that it is a sign of the times. They're changing times, they're unsettling times, but that's the reality right now.
Mitchell, we had Gabe DeArmond on a couple of weeks ago and talked about the recruitment of Luther Burden, and he basically said big reason he went to Mizzou, he probably got a pretty good NIL deal. We're about a year into the NIL. I'd like to get both of your opinions on what you see for the future of college sports related to that.
Yeah, well, I can start. It's ever changing and it's crazy. And I still don't think we know. Obviously, we're going to continue to see it evolve in different ways that it's going to be used, and probably eventually, hopefully, rules about how it can be used, because there really aren't any of those right now. As far as Missouri goes, though, I know that there's been a lot of people worried about its impact and dividing the haves and the have-nots. I think it's been a good thing for Missouri so far, and I think it will continue to be a good thing, especially with Eli Drinkwitz as head coach, because he's someone he's innovative, he's sharp, and he's going to embrace it. He's going to use it. And yeah, it's hard to say this, obviously, because it's hypothetical, but I don't think Luther Burden ends up at Missouri without NIL. He hasn't been able to announce a lot of his deals yet, but I've heard there are some significant ones. He's actually doing a show with our site, with PowerMizzou, that was put together through a sponsor, where he's going to get paid to do a series of video interviews that just got announced. So that's going to be kind of unique. But yeah, and I think that it's been a big deal with a lot of transfer recruitments too. I think you've seen a lot of people jump in the portal just to say, hey, can I find this, make some money elsewhere. And I think that, it's going to help. Missouri's never going to catch up to the Alabamas and the Georgias of the world just through NIL, but I think it maybe helps get a local kid like Luther Burden to stay home, who normally would have gone to Georgia, and every one or two of those you get adds up.
Pat, your thoughts on NIL?
Yeah, no, I agree with Mitchell that I think this is more potential for leveling the playing field than further disadvantaging some schools. I think that Mitchell's right that it's not going to be an absolute equalizer in terms of Missouri's recruiting class and all of a sudden goes toe-to-toe with Alabama or Georgia, but it does give you the chance to get some guys who would just be, as good as Luther Burden seemingly is. He's just like the eighth guy in a recruiting class, a star-studded recruiting class at some places. And so what are his NIL opportunities there versus what they would be at Missouri when you're the guy and you are from within the state? And I think that Missouri is one of those schools. This is where you go back to, I think, what Missouri fans and alums have talked about for decades, kind of the untapped potential of being the only school in the state. And so you've got potential sponsors and endorsers in Kansas City and in St. Louis and in Columbia and in Jeff City and all over the place who may say, hey, yeah, we want to get involved with the best Mizzou Tiger and, help our company, but also, help him and help the program as well. So I think the opportunities are there. I think places like a Boise State, where they really love their football team and there's some money in the city of Boise, you want to be a quarterback there? Or do you want to be the fourth quarterback at Oregon, or something like that? So I think that this is something that will provide opportunities also for non-revenue athletes. We've seen some of that. We've seen some softball players, some volleyball players, soccer players get some nice deals that I think can kind of enhance their college experience. So I think that that NIL will, while it is wildly unregulated, as Mitchell alluded to, and kind of all over the place right now, I think when things settle down and people get their arms around it, will be another kind of good thing for college athletes.
Talking with Pat Forde of Sports Illustrated and Mitchell Forde of PowerMizzou. If you'd like to ask them a question, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to those after our discussion. Pat, regarding NIL, what were your thoughts when Deion Sanders at Jackson State lands the #1 recruit in the nation?
That was a shocker, but then again, that's the kind of thing that, if you put your resources to work, you can go get a player or two. You may not get 20, but you can get some guys, and you start getting them. You get the #1 player in the country, according to some websites, Travis Hunter, to go to Jackson State. Then the trickle up, you get some other players who would be maybe FBS caliber who say, yeah, I want to go play with him there. I want to play for Deion Sanders. I want to see what that's all about. And it's a game changer. All of a sudden your program stature can change. And that, one of the things is it's not supposed to be a straight recruiting inducement. That's obviously what it has been. And that's where the NCAA needs to figure out how to regulate or put up guardrails. That was their term that they used when this all first started coming up. But I do think that it can diversify recruiting and opportunities for people, and you can see some wild things happen. I think it will make recruiting even more interesting and unpredictable than it has been in the past.
Mitchell, you do a wonderful job at the end of the season doing a position by position breakdown for Mizzou looking to the 2022 season. If our viewers haven't seen it, please go to PowerMizzou. I wish we could go through every position. We don't have time, but a couple of the high profile ones. Quarterback, how do you see that shaking out now?
Yeah, well, I appreciate the plug, but I would say also now, if you read them, most of them are outdated because everyone's transferred out or transferred in. But quarterback is the big question, right? That's going to be the defining question of this offseason and probably this coming season for Missouri. Connor Bazelak is out, transferred to Indiana. Sam Horn will be in, won't arrive until the summer. And Mizzou has kind of kicked the tires on some transfers, maybe expressed some interest in Spencer Rattler, maybe expressed some interest in JT Daniels, but hasn't offered a transfer quarterback to this point. So I am guessing that Eli Drinkwitz is just going to say, Sam Horn, Brady Cook, Tyler Macon, we'll have an open three-way competition and see which one of you all comes out ahead. And hopefully that's good enough. Basically, I do think he's really excited about Sam Horn, and it's a lot to ask a guy to show up in June and start right away. So I would be surprised if he does that, but it wouldn't surprise me if he's saying, I think I just need to get through this year or the first part of this year before he's ready, and not throw everything off by bringing in a transfer. It's risky, right? It's got to be someone with little enough eligibility left and sure enough thing to start that the positives outweigh the risks, where if you bring in a guy, you might have both Brady Cook and Tyler Macon transfer out and then you're just left with the transfer and a true freshman. Or, if you bring in a guy with 3 or 4 years left, Sam Horn might say, well, wait, that's not what I signed up for. You told me I was going to be the guy, and jump and try to find somewhere else. We've now seen, Missouri saw it last year, someone transfer before even playing a game at Missouri, and that cornerback Jadarius Perkins. So it's complicated, and I don't know what the right answer is. Obviously, Eli Drinkwitz gets paid a lot of money to figure that out, but I am curious to see how it's going to shake out. I do think that if he gets it wrong, if there's more struggles at the quarterback position, fans will obviously be a little bit upset with that, with him being the offensive coordinator and kind of quarterbacks coach as well.
Running back, we lose Tyler Beatty after one of the greatest seasons in school history. Not a lot of experience coming back, but the transfer from Stanford, Nate Pete, who's a Columbia guy, you think he'll take over, or Tavarius, with the kid from Texas?
Tavoris Jones.
Jones.
My guess is that it'll be a little bit more of a running back by committee thing. That's not what Eli Drinkwitz has done so far in his first 2 seasons at Mizzou. The first year it was all Larry Roundtree, like every play, and the last year was all Tyler Beatty every play. I don't think there's another guy quite capable of handling that type of workload on this roster. Nate Pete could be. He never was an every down back at Stanford, and he was explosive. He averaged something like 7 yards a carry a couple years ago, over 5 yards a carry last year. He's also a kick returner, so he has speed. But I would guess that you'll see kind of a rotation. If you had to make me guess right now who's going to lead the backfield, I would say Pete, but that could certainly change after spring football. I do think Tavoris Jones, that freshman out of El Paso, has a chance to play as a true freshman. I think we could see a little bit more of Elijah Young, who looked pretty good in the bowl game. So I would guess that you'll see a rotation of 3 or 4 guys there.
And then wide receiver, wasn't that productive of a group last year. There was no hesitation on your part to put Luther Burden in the starting lineup. I think we'll expect that.
I just, I think that when you're bringing in the number 4 overall prospect in the country, and he's got the NIL he's got, and you want to continue that recruiting momentum and keep him around, like, even if he doesn't play the most snaps or the second most snaps or something, I think he will be out there on the first snap of the season next year. I feel confident in saying that. And there's been a lot of players who haven't panned out, and I'm certainly not a scout, but I've been impressed with what I've seen from Luther Burden. He certainly seems to live up to the hype. When you look at some of the stuff he's done in like high school all-star games, and East St. Louis basically played an all-star game schedule. I mean, they were playing, Don Bosco and some of these other national schools, and he still put up the numbers he did. As long as he stays healthy, I think that he will be playing quite a bit. 23
touchdowns last year. That's pretty amazing. Hey, Pat, on the national scene, any update on the saga of Jim Harbaugh?
He is going to interview tomorrow on signing day with the Minnesota Vikings. And just at least symbolically, that looks like a guy who wants to leave, right? Now, I'm not sure they were going to sign more than 1 or 2 guys, if any, but still, when you're spending National Signing Day interviewing for an NFL job, that to me says you've got a foot out the door, at least. And it's been interesting. Well, they've kind of maintained activity. He's done some recruiting. They had a junior day on campus over the weekend. It's not like he's just stopped working, but nobody at Michigan has stood up and said, no, there's nothing to this. He's our guy, anything like that. I think that everybody's kind of preparing for him to move on. And when I was at the Orange Bowl when they played Georgia and talking to people down there, I think people were okay with him moving on. While, I think the feeling is, okay, he did his job. He got us back. It took longer than we thought, but he got us back to national prominence. We did beat Ohio State finally. We did win the Big Ten. We made the playoff. And he's kind of a hard guy to work with and work for. And he may feel the same way about Michigan. But that's just, like if you look at Harbaugh's track record, 7 years in one place is pretty long. And I do think that he definitely still has the NFL itch that he wants to scratch. He was so close to winning the Super Bowl, went to 3 NFC championships in a row. And I think he wants to get that done. So I would be surprised if he's not heading back. And then the question becomes whether Michigan fills his position from within or whether they go outside to a Luke Fickell or a Matt Campbell. But that will be the next big intrigue, I think, if he does go to the NFL.
I want to ask you about something you talk about in your podcast. Brian Kelly, the dancing videos, the fake Cajun accent. What has happened to that
guy? He's gone from a very buttoned down program to a very wild place, basically from Notre Dame to LSU. And I think he's trying to, kind of embrace the personality of the area, or I guess the aura of the area, but also to show, hey, I'm not just the kind of uptight, occasionally angry, miserable guy I looked like at Notre Dame. He's very, very smart. He's very calculating. he worked on Gary Hart's presidential campaign back in 1984. He's got some political savvy. So I think he knows I've got to change things up a little bit here to really connect with people. I'm a total outsider. I have no natural ties here. So I'm going to have to kind of change my image to a degree. And, it's going to be, here's how it works at LSU. You'll be received like a savior, even if you have a Boston accent, if you win. And if you could sound like Ed Orgeron, but if you lose, they're going to fire you.
Well, if any of our viewers have not seen these videos of him dancing around the players, it's you gotta see it. You just gotta see it.
It's painful.
Like that. So, okay. Turn to another subject. In fact, one of our viewers has said we're 17 minutes in. Nobody has said a word about MU men's basketball. So, Mitchell, let's go to the Tiger basketball. They just can't seem to close out games. First half, they played pretty well against Iowa State defensively, shot the ball, turned it over a lot. I thought that play at the end of the half where Boogie Coleman got a totally unnecessary 10-second call just turned the game around.
Yeah, I think so. And like they've been playing better for sure, but I don't know how much that's worth when you're playing better is going from losing pretty much every game against high major competition by 20 plus to still losing at the end of games, even though it's close. But yeah, you mentioning Boogie Coleman in the point guard position, it's become clear over the past few games that's the biggest weakness, and there are several. But I mean, it's pretty simple for opponents. If you put some ball pressure on Missouri's ball handlers, like they can't get into the offense. It takes 10 seconds to get the ball across half court. And then they got to bring Kobe Brown 30 feet from the basket to get him the ball there where he's out of position. And it's just all out of sorts. And that's why they've scored under 55 points the last two games. And I don't think that's something you can fix without bringing another point guard onto the roster. So obviously, it goes back to the recruiting in my mind. There's been too many total misses and obvious misses. When you look at like Jordan Wilmore and Ed Chang and a few other guys who just had no high major offers, it's not super surprising how that's panned out. There were a lot of people saying as to this past season started, who's going to play point guard, and those fears have been obviously validated. So it's tough. I definitely understand why there's not a whole lot of momentum around a team that's what are they now 8-12, I think. So yeah, it just at this point it's just play out the rest of the season, and we'll see what the win total is at the end, and if that's enough for the administration to bring the coach back.
Do you think they realized going the season that they didn't have a true point guard on the roster?
I mean, I guess not. Like a lot of people questioned it, but I would think that, he's not dumb. These coaches they've done this for a long time. I would think they thought someone could run the offense. I don't know whether they thought Boogie Coleman would be better suited for that role. And I do know that, Cornell Mann mentioned on the radio show last night, he maybe looked a little better in practice because they didn't have, he was going against Anton Brookshire, who was a true freshman who didn't have a lot of, D1 basketball division or defensive experience. So maybe they thought they were a little more optimistic because of that. Maybe they thought Brookshire could maybe help out, but that's another one, a guy who he didn't have any other high major offers. So what are you really expecting him to come in right away and be your starting point guard when his best other offer was from Missouri State? That just seems like a flawed approach to me. But yeah, I would think that they felt better about that position entering the season. But again, it's not a huge surprise to a lot of people who have followed the team that's been an area of concern.
Tigers take on Florida tomorrow night. Give us a little scouting report. The Gators, I think, have kind of underachieved this year. And their big guys hurt, right?
They've got injury issues. Yeah. Colin Castleton, who's their leading scorer and rebounder and leader in blocks, is out. And I think he'll still be out tomorrow night. I haven't seen an update, but last I saw it was supposed to be out for a little while. He's got a shoulder injury. And then his backup, who started in his place, had eye surgery and is out for the season. So they basically just chuck a ton of threes and try to get fouled from what I've seen. They've shot some over 33s a game in their last 5 games. They got to the line 41 times against Oklahoma State. So it's really not a terrible matchup for Mizzou. Mizzou tends to struggle when the other team has bigger guys that could get Kobe Brown in foul trouble and make it harder to score around the rim, because as anyone who's watched Mizzou knows, they can't shoot. But I still, it's still a concern. Obviously, Florida's probably a more talented team. So we'll see. And we'll see if the game even gets played, by the way, because Florida's got to make it to Columbia with the snowstorm we got.
That's true, yeah. They did have a pretty good win against Oklahoma State the other day, I thought. So, Pat, on your 40 minutes column this week, you talked about the return of the big man, and you also talked about coaches on the hot seat. Give us a little summary on everything there.
Yeah, I'll start with the hot seat stuff, and I did not include Konzo on the list because I just sense that I think that there's a very good chance he's coming back. I can't say with any certainty. Mitchell would know better, but I know Desiree Reed Francois, the new athletic director, thinks very highly of him, and her son is, I think, hoping to be a walk-on the team next year. So I don't think this is basketball, but my sense is that she likes Konzo and wants to give him another year to try to get it straightened out there. So my expectation is that Konzo will be back. Other people I had on the hot seat, I mean, some big names. I mean, Jim Boeheim is having the worst season in his career, 46 years at Syracuse. I mean, they're a mess. Memphis with Penny Hardaway, which brought in, superstar recruiting class, is a mess. And Penny is cracking under the pressure and cussing out the media. And I'm going to go see them play actually against Cincinnati on Thursday and kind of gauge the train wreck for myself. Patrick Ewing has been a major underachiever at Georgetown. He's now under 500 overall for his record there. Fred Hoiberg, a guy, who coached in the NBA and had success at Iowa State, 3 straight terrible seasons at Nebraska. So, you take already, you have Maryland, you have Louisville open. We could have some big jobs and some big movement, I think, on the coaching front there.
Talk a little about the return of the big man. You highlighted some guys that really, the game's changed a lot since I grew up when we had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and the like, and back then, but we got some big guys making some impact this year.
Yeah, Mark, it's almost kind of a throwback to a degree. I think we've become accustomed to seeing big guys who range on the floor more these days, face up, shoot threes, and just play away from the basket. And I do think like Chet Holmgren, the freshman at Gonzaga, a lot of people say he is the future. I don't know whether there's that many people 7 foot who are that skilled, but there's just a lot of guys who want to play that way now. But if you look around this year, and Missouri got an eyeful from Oscar Tshiebwe, the Kentucky center, who's just a rebounding machine, averaging 15 rebounds a game. There's a lot of guys like that. Missouri got an eyeful from Kofi Coburn from Illinois, also, who plays that way. The guys at Purdue, I think, could go to the Final Four, and they've got 2 centers that they rotate, and neither of them go very far from the basket. They're a throw-it-in team. I'm trying to think who else I had on that list, but it's just interesting to me that runs a little bit counter to the trend of what we've been seeing, that several of the National Player of the Year candidates are low post, back to the basket, paint sort of players.
I'd like to get your thoughts on Bruce Pearl. He's put 2 schools in trouble, had a show cause, and he gets rewarded with a multi-million-dollar lifetime contract. What does that say about the game?
That's college basketball right there in a nutshell. And that's Auburn in a nutshell as well. Auburn has never been a place that cares very much about anything other than winning. And Bruce Pearl has them winning. I mean, he's an extraordinary coach. He really is. And he has recruited extremely well. And the fact that he's created a pipeline to Atlanta that has now just paid huge dividends. How he created the pipeline, I don't know. But things are more legal now and there's more movement. But even when they were undergoing the NCAA and criminal investigations for what Chuck Person, their assistant, was part of, they were getting players out of Atlanta. And so, 3-year show cause after getting in trouble at Tennessee, and then he goes there and has an issue, and he's suspended for only 2 games. They were very lucky with that. Very lucky not to get a postseason ban, I thought, this year, because they self-imposed a postseason ban last year for a team that everybody knew was going to be bad, and they somehow got credit for that. That was the get out of jail free card, so to speak. But that's college basketball. And now, Bruce Pearl there. I mean, I live in Louisville. Mitchell grew up in Louisville. The fans here were clamoring immediately, let's go get Bruce Pearl. Louisville's under investigation too, but they don't care. The fans just want to win. And so that's just kind of the attitude that goes with the sport.
Mitchell, one of Mizzou's recruits for next year is a kid from Blue Valley, Aiden Shaw, very four-star kid. I have not seen him play. I do know somebody who goes to Blue Valley games regularly, says he's going to make an immediate contribution. What do you know about?
Yeah, so I actually haven't seen him play in person yet either, but from everything I've heard, he's a very good athlete. Should be a guy who can play the type of defense that Conzo Martin wants. He can guard every position, switch every position. A little bit raw, I think, from a skill perspective. Probably needs to become a better shooter. Probably needs to become a better ball handler. But a guy who can give you, rebounds, some low post scoring and defense right away, and should be able to just infuse some athleticism onto the roster, which is something that they need.
Okay, you guys ready for some questions from our viewers?
Sure.
It's a tough crowd, so be ready. Mitchell, is the problem with signing Deshaun Woods his GPA, his test scores, both, or something else? Do you see him eventually making his way to Mizzou?
Yeah, so for those unfamiliar, Deshaun Woods is a four-star offensive lineman from Nebraska. He committed back, I guess it was last summer, didn't sign in the early period. I don't know what the exact issue is other than it's just qualification concerns. I don't, the NCAA has a sliding scale with test scores and GPA, and then there's also core class requirements. I don't know where his issue is. I just know that at this point, I don't expect him to sign tomorrow. There's a chance he could sign somewhere else and they could try the academic redshirt route or getting him eligible or whatever. There's also a chance he ends up in junior college, and then, it's possible from there he could make his way back to Missouri, but I don't think he'll be a part of Mizzou's signing class tomorrow.
And he was the number one player out of Nebraska, right?
Yes.
Okay. Again, for Mitchell, do you think the wheels for Connor Bazelak's transfer were started when he was pulled from the South Carolina game? Have heard that he was very upset afterward. Was it because he didn't start the bowl, or did he and Coach Drink just not see eye to eye?
I don't think it was because he was pulled from the South Carolina game, because he ended up, I guess it was the Florida game was next. I mean, he started that one too, and the Arkansas game. So I would think that if he was done at that point, he could have just transferred then. And obviously Eli Drinkwitz did end up sticking by him. Maybe I would guess that Eli Drinkwitz really wanted it to work with Bazelak, and he tried everything he could to make it work. And the Arkansas game was kind of a breaking point. I don't remember his stat line, but he threw for 60 yards and an interception. The offense wasn't getting it done at all. And then he swapped him out for Brady Cook. And at that point, it was, I think, pretty clear immediately thereafter that Brady Cook or Tyler Macon was going to start the bowl game. I think that was just the point where Eli Drinkwitz lost confidence in Bazelak, and Bazelak either sensed that or was told that and decided it was best to try to get a fresh start elsewhere. So I'm curious. I'll always be curious exactly what happened with Bazelak this season, because we saw him be a pretty solid quarterback last year and early this year. I thought he was good against Kentucky. He had one bad interception, but he was not the reason they lost that game. He was fine against Boston College until the end of the game. He was definitely battling injuries, but yeah, I'll be curious if he can, maybe a fresh start gets him back to that point.
We have a question about Conzo Martin returning, Pat. I think you touched on that, but I guess I'll throw this out to both of you. It's a $6 million buyout. One of our viewers asked, wouldn't it cost Mizzou more than $6 million in lost ticket sales, sponsorships, and fan apathy? What are both of your thoughts on that?
Mitchell could probably speak better to the fan apathy or ticket sales. $6 million's a lot, I think, you do get a lot of SEC revenue, but I think you're spending $6 million without being sure that he can't turn it around, or to be sure that you've got somebody that's going to do better. Maybe there is somebody that you identify that you feel really confident that come in and do the job. I personally would give Conzo another year. If you look back again at what he inherited, it was a disaster. He got the program up and running. I think he missed an opportunity with last year's team, which was definitely his best team. And the way the wheels kind of came off at the end of last year, that, I expected that team, in February to go into the tournament and make some noise. And by the end, they were out of gas, out of sync, whatever the case was. So that, I think, almost carries over a little bit of the fan frustration into this season, where, I'm of the mind, okay, give him a mulligan on this year. It's obviously his worst season, and one of the worst seasons Missouri's had, other than the Kim Anderson era, in quite a while. But I would give him one more chance to get this thing right next season.
Yeah, so I'm curious to see what's going to happen. I think that that Desiree Reed-Francois either wants him to, I'm sure she would prefer him to win quite a few more games down the stretch, get to, I don't know, 14, 15 wins, and probably take it out of her hands a little bit and say, yeah, that's not a good season, but it's not terrible. Showed some progress toward the end. We can run it back, or like lose out and win 9 games, and it makes the decision easier. It's harder when you're weighing a coach who won 11 or 12 games, and also the contract situation, which was brought up. It's tricky. It's not. I don't think it's a total deal breaker, but it's tough because you have the contract says he cannot be fired for cause until May 1st. So you're going to have to get creative to go around that, whether it means paying maybe a little bit more than $6 million. You can't really hire a coach in May. So probably have to pay a little bit more than $6 million to get him out of that. You got to buy out the assistants. You got to pay for the new coach. There's no doubt in my mind that would be more expensive than probably the fan apathy for one more season. It's more so probably just, do you want to lose all sorts of momentum and have the program feel like it was when you hired Konzo, where it's coming off, if you think there's a chance next season could be just as bad, multiple seasons where you're not even close to in contention, no buzz at all, you got to then probably give a very assured contract to the next coach like they had to do with Konzo, where it guaranteed so many years, it's harder to recruit. I think that you just kind of have to weigh the momentum more than the financial, because Mizzou doesn't sell enough tickets, I don't think, to make up, what would it be, probably like 9 million or something like that.
Pat, when do you think OU and Texas will join the SEC, and how will they adjust the divisions?
The Big 12 seems steadfast in holding their feet to the fire and saying you will pay the exit fee until whatever date, or else, and so I think they're stuck until I can't remember what year it is, 2024, 25, whatever that is. And then when they come in, I expect them to blow up the divisions. I think you're looking at scheduling pods. Probably you're gonna have 16 teams, 14 pods, where you play the 3 other teams in your pod every year, and then you rotate around through everybody else. The tricky part for that becomes some of the rivalry games and how you make sure those still get played. Specifically games that had been cross division, Tennessee, Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, LSU out at Florida, that sort of thing. But I think that's kind of the route that they are looking at going. And then, what does that mean for the SEC championship game? I don't know. I mean, it's probably you take just the 2 highest rated teams in whether it's the college football playoff rankings or some other schematic and match them up. I think a 16 team conference is a problem. I really do. I think really Oklahoma and Texas coming in, I think, is a massive problem for college athletics as a whole. I don't think it's good for anybody other than people who want to make money. And most fans I know don't really care how much their school makes. They want to know whether we're going to win or not. And I think this makes it harder for everyone involved to win, other than, Alabama and Georgia that are already ahead of everyone. But for Oklahoma and Texas, it's harder to win. For Missouri and Florida and Arkansas and everyone else, it's harder to win. So this bigger is not better to me. It's just more complicated.
Will Greg Marshall ever coach again?
He's a good enough coach that he probably will, and it's going to be at a lower level. I think it's a tough sell. It's the kind of sell you got to probably do under radar, and he has to say how much he's learned and grown as a person and blah, 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 blah. But I think somebody will hire him because he's won a lot of games.
Mitchell, how many more wins does the women's team need to make the tourney?
Ooh, that's a good question. I've not looked into the latest bracketology on that. I think
they're eighth, I think, as of today. Okay. I believe.
Yeah. I would guess if they can stay above 500 in league play, I would give them a pretty good shot, because the SEC is a tough conference. I think last I saw 8 or 9 teams from the league were projected to get in. So that's, you're not as long as you can avoid losing to the bottom feeders. I think if you can hover around 500 in league play, I think they would have a good shot.
Pat, can you explain the dispute between the SEC and other conferences over the number of teams to be in the playoffs? And I'll add on to that. I read your column about expanding the playoff and the length of the season. So give us your comments and thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the dispute is interesting. It's perplexing. It's infuriating. Personally, I am in favor of a bigger playoff, but the Big 12, I'm sorry, the Big 10, the Pac-12, and the ACC are basically roadblocking it. The AAC is also somewhat against it. I think that to some degree, some of those folks are just arguing about details because there's no doubt that there is some anger and spite towards the SEC for blowing up the alignment and taking Oklahoma and Texas, and other conferences are like, hey, we are tired of the SEC power play, and they see the 12-team playoff format as being part of the SEC power play because Greg Sankey helped design it, and because for now ESPN has sole rights to it, and ESPN is linked in arms with the SEC. So that's one reason that people are against it. I don't fully understand the ACC's reasoning, but I did write about that a couple of weeks ago. That one of the issues there is length of season. That Jim Phillips, the commissioner, said, look, I talked to Dabo Sweeney, whose team has been in it. I talked to Mario Cristobal, who's now at Miami, who was in it as an assistant at Alabama. 15 games is enough. We don't want to play more games. It's too much for the players. And I agree with them there. I think you go to 16 and you are playing a professional length schedule, and you should be prepared to either pay the players more or in some other way adequately compensate them. So my reason or my solution there is to get rid of conference championship games. I don't think they add very much. Now, conferences won't do that because they make a lot of money on it, but I don't see that as something that's an added benefit. It frees up a week in December that helps make the academic calendar work, which is what a lot of the presidents have concerns about. Like, they don't want to play games straight through finals week. So it gives you schedule flexibility, and it takes one game off the plate. And there may not be a huge difference between 15 and 16, but I think that's enough of one that it's more palatable to say, let's have a 12-team playoff, and the maximum you're playing is 15 games as opposed to playing 16 or 17.
If I'm a college kid who's got true NFL potential, that extended season scares the heck out of me. And I think about, these guys are opting out of the bowl games this year. And Matt Corral, the quarterback at Ole Miss, it looked pretty bad when it happened. I guess x-rays were negative, but do you think kids would start opting out of the playoff?
I mean, my hope is, and my thought is no. That I think that we would have seen like Kenny Pickett from Pittsburgh and Kenneth Walker from Michigan State play in the Peach Bowl if that game were a playoff game and it was a chance to still make a national championship. I think that you get more players to play in those games because they're more meaningful. But as you said, I mean, if you keep extending the season, then yeah, I think you increase the likelihood that somebody's going to say, why am I playing this long again when the best thing I'm getting out of this is NIL, which is basically, I may be getting at the top end, I may be getting a car. I'm getting 50,000, but I have a potential $50 million career over here. Which one do I want to do? So I do think that the more you ask of the players, the more you either need to compensate them or to understand they may just say, I'm out.
Okay, as not surprised, we have a couple names being thrown out as future Mizzou basketball coaches, so I'll give those to you. Desiree Reed-Francois hired TJ Otzelberger at UNLV. Would he be someone to watch in the future at Mizzou? I'll throw that to either of you.
Does he have a tie to Iowa State? Was that like his alma mater or something?
I think he was an assistant.
He was an assistant there.
Yeah.
He was the guy that he recruited all of those good players they had back in the day, under Fred Hoiberg.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would guess that considering how quickly he turned that around, and that, it's not like football where there's a huge difference between the SEC and the Big 12 and basketball. The SEC's gotten better, but the Big 12 is still a very good basketball conference and is adding some good teams. I would think that, it would be a kind of a lateral move to go from Iowa State to Mizzou, and they would do everything they could to keep him after what he did this year. I doubt his relationship with Desiree Reed-Francois would be good enough to make him do that. But if Mizzou waved enough money in his face, I suppose it's possible.
Another
I agree with
name
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Excuse me, Pat, another name is Thad Matta. Still, is he healthy enough to return to the sideline?
I don't know. I mean, his name gets bandied around quite a bit without anything ever actually happening. I think people are still concerned about his health to the point where, it's one of those professions. That's why you see, quite honestly, coaches dyeing their hair and getting Botox, because you need to look young to recruit. And he does not project health and vibrancy when he struggles to get out of a chair. And yes, there may be some actual discrimination involved here from like a physical disability standpoint, but he has trouble walking. He had, major back surgery that didn't go well. He's had drop foot and just has had trouble getting around. I don't know if there's anything else involved. And I don't know for sure how, hot his fire is to coach still, but my suspicion is that we've probably seen the last of Thad Matta as a head coach at the high level, but you never know.
Who are some up and coming coaches we should keep an eye on?
I tell you what, I watched two of them last night in a heck of a game in the Mountain West Conference between Wyoming and Colorado State. Jeff Linder is in his second year at Wyoming, and let me pull up the numbers here real quick. He took over an absolute grease fire there. They were in 2019, they were 8-24. In 2020, they were 9-24. Linder came in last year, went 14-11. This year, he's 17-3. So he turned it around quickly there, and he did the same thing at Northern Colorado. He was the coach there before. He had 3 20-win seasons there after taking over a bad situation. On the other side of that, Nico Medved, who's at Colorado State, has done a really good job there. He was the head coach for 1 year at Drake, and before that, he was at Furman. But at Colorado State, he took over a losing program. He's had 2 straight 20-win seasons. This will be a third one this year. Both those teams could make the NCAA tournament, and if they do, they could win games there. So that's just a couple people, like, just off the top of my head. I just freshly watched them, and I was impressed by what they did.
Yeah, I saw the highlights. That game went into overtime. It looked like a really great game last night. Mitchell, I want to ask you about one of the transfers, and we have Tyrone Hopper and his cousin Tyrone Hopper, which is going to be a nightmare for Mike Kelly if they're in the game at the same time. But one of those guys is like in his 7th year. Is that right?
Yeah, Tyrone Hopper is going to be in his 7th year of college football next year, which is crazy and can only happen because of the COVID year. I'm going to get this wrong, but it was like he redshirted, like normal redshirt year, his first year at North Carolina, got hurt his second year at North Carolina and got a waiver, played like the next 3 years. But one of those was the COVID year, and then was going to play his last year of eligibility last year, but got hurt in the first game. He got another waiver or something like that. So like he committed to North Carolina when Gary Pinkel was the coach of Missouri, which is incredible.
He's going to be like 24, 25.
Yeah, he's almost as old as me, actually.
Pat, I'll wrap up. What's your nobody's really distinguished themselves this year in basketball, but who's your champion and your Final Four?
Yeah, it's interesting. We had no unbeatens left before mid-January, and right now I think Auburn's the only team left in the nation that only has 1 loss. So there certainly is no super team. I guess if I had to pick a Final Four right now, obviously without a bracket or anything, but I think Gonzaga, UCLA. I was just out in Los Angeles and watched UCLA Arizona. It was a high-level game. Arizona's probably more talented, but UCLA is so experienced and tough. I think that they will be there at the end. So I'm going to say Gonzaga, UCLA, Kentucky. I think that they've got the pieces, and they're coming together in a scary good way. And I'm going to say, you know what? I'll throw in Auburn. I just think that they have an incredible amount of talent, and Pearl has been there before. If we get John Calipari and Bruce Pearl in the same Final Four, it's a real feel-good story, let me tell you. But I think they've both got really good teams.
They played each other here to go to the Final Four.
Yeah.
In 19, and I did the PA for that game, and it was about as intense a game as I've ever worked. So
yeah, it was a really good game.
Didn't see a lot of love, mutual love there. That's it.
They hate each other. That goes back to when Pearl was at Tennessee and Cal was at Memphis, and those guys went after it hard. They just very much dislike each other.
Final question. Are we going to hear anything on KU sanctions?
I mean, eventually, yeah, they'll get through this season. And that's, you could say, maybe say them for the Final Four, but boy, was I unimpressed with them against Kentucky.
Yeah.
When they got matched up against a team with size and talent, they collapsed. I think that the IARP, which has their case and has Louisville's and has Arizona and LSU and Memphis, it's just been a colossal disaster for the NCAA. Terrible, terrible idea that has been poorly executed, takes forever, costs a fortune, gets nothing done. They've handled one case so far, and that was North Carolina State. And then they got to the end of that and basically said, we don't really want to penalize any of the current players, so we're not doing much of anything. So Kansas, I would think, hopefully will have a hearing and a resolution during the spring/summer of 2022. But why try to even predict what that governing body is going to do? Because you never know, and they've just failed to get anything done.
And I thought they really handed Oklahoma State unfairly this year, much like they did to Missouri a couple of years ago.
Yeah, well, given what they've done with everybody else, what they did with Auburn and what they did with North Carolina State, then yeah, Oklahoma State has fresh reason to be unhappy.
Mitchell, prediction for tomorrow night, and will Javon Pickett play?
That's a good question. We're talking to Konzo at, I think, 4 this afternoon, so I'll get an update from him. If I had to guess, I would say he probably wouldn't, because I know he said on his radio show last night he wasn't practicing yesterday. So, but we'll see. I think it'll probably actually be a close game. Mizzou has shown this season that usually whenever they, their fans they're at their most down on the team and they're playing at home, they'll play a decent game. And like I said, Florida's really not a terrible matchup as long as they don't get hot from 3. But I'm not willing to pick Mizzou at this point. I'll just pick them to like have a lead for 35 minutes and lose by 3.
Hey guys, thank you very much. This was great. We could talk to you another hour, I think, but we want to be respectful of your time. Pat Forde, his Twitter handle is @byPat40. Mitchell's is @MitchellForde, numeral 4, letter D. Make sure you check him out. Pat at Sports Illustrated and Mitchell at PowerMizzou. Guys, thank you again. Next week, we will have Jeremy Crabtree, who's we're all familiar with, local recruiting expert, senior recruiting editor for On3. 2 weeks, we will have Chiefs football radio analyst Dana Hughes. Should be interesting talking about how the season wrapped up. So guys, again, thanks. We'll see you all next week.